Good evening, everyone. Very warm welcome to our second session. Tonight, we are looking at setting up your child for success in the revision zone of common entrance, particularly. We are really thrilled to, delighted to have our three panelists back online. And I will introduce you firstly to them and give them an opportunity to just give you a quick insight into their world. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Alicia Drummond, the founder of Teen Tips and the Wellbeing Hub. And then we've also got Lucinda Miller, who is joining us, who is the founder of NatureDoc. And finally, last but certainly not least, is Morrison, founder of Tassomai. Am I pronouncing that right? Tassomai. Good. Yeah. A learning app for students. So perhaps, Alicia, can I hand over to you initially just to give everyone a quick précis of your world?
Yes, of course. It's really lovely to be with everybody again. So thank you for inviting me, Antonia. So I'm an adolescent therapist, and I've been working in schools since 2009, talks for parents, pupils and staff, anything to do with mental health and wellbeing. And then when the COVID hit, we created the Wellbeing Hub for Schools, which gives parents, staff and pupils access to vast resources of information to be able to create environments that nurture and protect the mental health and wellbeing of young people.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Lucinda, on to you.
So I'm the clinical lead of NatureDoc, and we specialise in women and children's health. I specialise myself in children's health, and particularly kids with neurodevelopmental issues. So anyone that's kind of neurodivergent, maybe dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADD, etc. So a lot of the people that come to see us are kids that are struggling with their behaviour, their learning, their development, or, allergies, etc.
Fantastic. And Murray, on to you, please.
Hi, yeah, thanks so much for having me back. I'm Murray. I'm the founder of a company called Tassomai, which is an app. It's a revision and learning program. I come from a teaching background myself, teaching and tutoring. And what I tried to do was create something for my students, which was, your revision guru in your pocket, basically. So it's a program that's designed to help students organize their revision, their practice, and really kind of find those gaps, fill in those gaps, and get ready for exam day as best prepared they can with the knowledge they need.
Wonderful, thank you. So tonight, in a similar format to last week, we're going to cover broadly sort of 5 different areas, but we're really happy to take questions at any point during the webinar. So please do fire them over, and we will make sure that where possible we can get them answered. And the other thing I think I wanted to emphasise as a mother of 4 myself is the age group that we're looking at tonight, because I think it's really important. So these are years 8, so they are sort of 12, 13-year-olds looking down the road of common entrance. So to kick off with, just so that we can start to understand our role in setting up our children for success, Murray, first off, how can we really help as a parent?
We had this discussion, as you know, last week as well, and it's distinctly different, of course, with different age groups. But I think what's a common area is parental anxiety is completely reasonable. You see your child preparing for this range of exams in many subjects, and you may feel that perhaps you're not that confident to help. And then the result of that is the risk that you sort of maybe push a little too hard, do more work without being able to be specific about how they should be working and being helpful and supportive in that way. And it's very easy to fall into that trap. So I think our role as parents in helping our children prepare for common entrance is really about giving them as much support in terms of time, space, support with the organization. And that really comes from just honest, open conversations about where are you feeling confident? Where are you struggling? How much time are you going to put into your revision, given, we've got half term or these opportunities, and how can I help you to help yourself? And that's really the kind of tone and tenor of the conversation I think as parents we need to be having to help our child get ready for the exam as best they possibly can.
Sure. And on that note, as the time draws nearer to exams, Alicia, can I ask you what obvious signs, if there is such a thing, in children should we be looking out for that perhaps they are overly concerned or worried, or dare I say it, aren't quite worried enough?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's that understanding that underneath all unmet emotional needs, behavior is about feelings. So when we feel okay, we act okay. So if your child is suddenly particularly angry, particularly tearful, they're kind of withdrawing, all of those little signs that they're just not themselves. If you just keep holding that thought, this behavior is because of something that's going on emotionally. So what is it that I think that they're particularly worried about? And if it's on the opposite side, it not worried enough, you're unlikely to see much change in behavior because they're not stressed about it. We tend to act out when we're stressed. So, if they're perhaps a little bit too cool for school, it's about getting them to understand that actually we want to be a little bit pumped up and ready for action going into an exam, because then we're going to be performing at our kind of top level. So some stress is okay, but just keeping an eye on the behavior. So if the behavior starts to go out of the window or really changes dramatically, then you need to be thinking, okay, what's driving this?
And from a sort of nutritional side of things, Lucinda, are there anything that we can do to help boost brain power? Are they too young, for example, to take supplements? And dare I say, I've got children, some of whom are really good at taking pills and some who are awful. I've still got one daughter that chews paracetamol, which I honestly can't imagine how revolting that must be. But yeah, how do we approach it from a nutritional standpoint?
Well, whether you've got a child who's a day child or boarder, there's only 10 days or something till the end of term. So you will be feeding them during the holidays. And this is sort of where you can really help. So it's all about feeding them the best, most nutrient dense food you can. And one of the best things you can do is to provide a really good breakfast or brunch if they're getting up a bit later, and also really highly nutritious snacks, because those are the two areas of nutrition that usually are the shortfalls. Supper's usually amazing, it's a family meal, but its breakfast could easily be a sweet cereal or a croissant, and snacks could easily be some chocolate hobnobs or a packet of crisps. So if you can switch those to maybe porridge with some nut butter or some scrambled egg, even on some sourdough, that would be great. And snack wise, there's loads and loads of ideas on my website and also in my cookbook, The Good Stuff. But things like, fruit with nut butter, or oatcakes with cream cheese, or carrots with hummus, rather than all the sort of ready-made convenience food. And then in terms of supplements, now, once a child gets to 12, they are seen as an adult in terms of supplements, in terms of size and weight, etc. So obviously there's an occasional child who's very, very tiny still, but essentially from 12, they can take all supplements, whether they're seen as children's or teens or adults. So that's all fine. So I would go for a more grown up, or at least a teen multivitamin. I would consider a really good fish oil. I'll talk probably more later about omega-3, but that would be really good. And if they're super stressed, things like theanine or saffron or magnesium. But in terms of how do you get them in them? So if they can swallow capsules, brilliant, easy days. But if they can't, what you do is you open them up and you just mix the contents into a little bit of fruit puree or smoothie or yogurt. And that only needs to be a couple of tablespoons full. It doesn't need to be loads. So it's not like a whole smoothie, because they might not finish that, because I know what children are like. They sort of start off gun-ho and then they sort of give up. So it only needs to be a little bit, just to really take away the taste. And that can be by spoon, or it can be by syringe if they're super fussy, but I don't think they will be at this age.
Fantastic. So great advice. I shall remember that one. And I guess we're sort of talking about those that are getting a bit ruffled by exams and the lead up, and keeping things calm at home, I guess, is easier said than done. How do we reassure them that life is okay, and that the exams are going to happen, but to keep things calm? Alicia, I guess that falls to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to, it's like I always say to people, you know, stress is kind of catching. It's like I've got this ball and I'm holding it and now I chuck it at you and now you've got it and we pass it around and it's horrid. So I think the most important thing is for us to be okay, and to give them that message that we completely and utterly think they're going to be totally fine, because of course they are. I think planning stuff for after the exams is really important, so that they get that idea that life will just go on. Whatever happens in the exams, life is going to go on and it's all going to be okay. So you know, and if you've chosen the right school for the child, there should be no reason for them to be overly stressed, because you know, I think where the problems often happen where we're trying to get them into a school that we want them to be in, but actually which isn't the right school for them. And you know, nobody thrives bumping along the bottom. So we can, you know, sometimes I think we can get them through these exams, but actually it's not the right thing to do. So, you know, if you've chosen the school right, then there is no reason whatsoever for anybody to be stressed. It's an exam, it will come, it will go, and then we're going to go off and do this, and it's going to be great. If you're feeling anxious, you know, that's normal. It's not a bad thing, but we need to keep it under control. So we want to keep life in balance in terms of getting outside, doing lots of exercise, you know, still doing the things that are fun, because they're too little really to be doing hours and hours of revision at this point. And I really don't believe they should be. I think honestly at this point, if you can't get in on what you're being taught at school, then you should be asking yourself if this is the right choice. And I know that's a bit controversial, but I'm putting it out there.
Murray, I'm going to come straight to you on that one. Funny enough, I was thinking about it leading up to this tonight. I mean, this is the first sort of proper exam, if you like, that this age group will have faced, and particularly at the moment with the last couple of years. I mean, they are a generation who, you know, haven't done this before. I mean, how do we best set them up for just the experience of the exam taking and the revising beforehand? Because it's a completely new format for many.
Yeah, and I think it's very easy to fall into that trap of saying, here is this monolithic challenge ahead of you. It's going to be different from anything you've experienced before. It's going to be this great challenge and you're going to be judged on your performance. It's really terrifying if you put it like, don't show them that clip, for God's sake. So it can be something that can be terrifying, but on the other hand, you can just take the view that this is not really that much different from what you do day in, day out in class and in your homework and so forth. You know, you're asked when you've been taught how to, you know, factorize an equation, to factorize a few equations, and the exam is going to ask you to do one of each of these sort of many challenges that you've seen and you've experienced before. So there's a way of approaching this that says, this is just a chance for you to demonstrate what you already know. And in the preparation for this, let's figure out what you feel confident about and what you feel less confident about. And if not feeling confident about X, Y, and Z is a problem, then we can have a little look and address those things. But it's not, as Alicia said, it's not the sort of be all and end all of kind of, you know, life does not start and finish with common entrance. This is really just a chance to get across your personality to your future school and see if you're a good fit for them and have them see if you're a good fit. And the result when it comes is going to be something that should be right. You know, if you fit in at that school and you're going to be happy there, they're going to accept you. And it needn't be something that's so terrifying.
And I guess in the cases of, you know, procrastination, which let's be honest, I'm still struggling with age 50. Do things like bribery work? I mean, just on a common sort of basic parenting approach. And if so, I mean, are there good bribes? Alicia, perhaps you'd be best placed to answer that one.
I think bribery, it's interesting, isn't it? Because often with bribery, we have to be careful where we're attaching it. So if we're attaching it to the end goal, i.e. to the exam results. So I've heard parents saying, oh, you know, I'll give you £100 for every A you get at A level or whatever. And that's just wrong, because then you've got that end goal. A, from a child's point of view, it's a million miles away before the results come through. So it's not actually that motivating. Secondly, if you attach it to the end goal, we put them under huge pressure, because unless you achieve the end goal, you're going to feel like you failed anyway. And so I think, I think I'd rather call it rewards along the way and keep them small. So often I think with parents, we make the mistake of going big and doing the big, large one. But actually what we're trying to do here is to develop something called intrinsic motivation, where you do it because you get that feel good factor. And we can really give them that by by praising what we actually see in terms of effort. And I think that's a lot more, it's really, really helpful. If you really want to go down the bribery route, I mean, I'm sure Lucinda's the expert on this, but I don't think you should ever bribe them with food, because you don't want to we just don't need to get that association in, but I'll leave that one for Lucinda. And as I say, just keep it really little things like, well, okay, if you manage to get through 3 sessions of 20 minutes this morning, you can have an extra 10 minutes on your Xbox at lunchtime. So it's the reward is very closely attached to the effort rather than being something too far out. That's my thought.
And Lucinda, do you want to pick up on the food rewards, if you like?
So the trouble is, if you're always talking about food being good and making it a reward, then kids will also associate food as bad as well. So, it could be, sort of unhealthy food, bad food, naughty cake. And all of these things are not particularly good for teenagers to associate, because there is a big rise in eating disorders, especially over the last couple of years. So what's better to say is something like, once you've finished your XYZ revision, let's sit down for a lovely lunch together, or let's go for a walk together. So it's something that you're doing. It's not the food, but it's the experience of being together and the nice things. Or to think of something completely different, like, you do, give them a pencil or a nice smelly rubber or whatever it might be instead, if you want to give an actual reward. Or it could be time on their phone, time on their screen time, which is usually what they want at this age.
Or time one-on-one with their mother, which I offer. And very rarely is it taken up, if I'm honest. Yeah,
but they want to play a game with you. They want to go, they want to do things with you. And even if it's just being in the garden together or chucking a ball around, they love that. That's what they're craving, is time just with you, especially if you've got a very big family with lots of kids.
And can we just touch the huge subject that is sort of Xboxes and phones, screen time generally, I guess. I mean, I totally get real life is, it is a reward, and that is, it is what they're drawn to. But I mean, how do we best manage that in light of what we're talking about, in light of revision and impending exams? Murray, will you kick off and give me your thoughts on that?
Well, it's obviously so difficult, and we all go through these battles, I'm sure. We have this feeling that it's very bad news, all this screen time, but there of course are these arguments of, well, actually it's great for kind of problem solving and things like that. I'm fairly skeptical about it myself, but I really echo what Lucinda and Alicia have said, really, that as a mechanism for building in some reward structure with short feedback, screen time can be a very motivating thing. I don't think it should be the sole motivation, because I think there are other more sort of healthy and long-lasting fun things they could do. But I think if that's what they're really craving, and that's a thing that they would really value as a reward, then why not make that part of the structure? It just shouldn't be the only structure, because the logical extension of that is, okay, you've done your revision, now you're going to lock yourself in your room and play on the Xbox for the rest of the day. That's not a healthy half term. So everything in moderation and everything in balance, but I think they have a very useful role to play in helping to develop your child's motivation for good preparation and balance generally.
And just a slight angle on that, which, Alicia, I'd love your thoughts on. When there's sort of competitive revision, which I think, dare I say it, sometimes is more the girls that do, I've done X number of hours, or I've done, again, how best to handle that as a parent, which sometimes is obviously translated through phone use and messaging.
I think, I always think whenever they say everybody else is, like, okay, small pinch of salt here, and just saying to them, you know what, we don't really know what everybody else is doing, because we know that people will probably put up 15 photos before they choose the one they're actually going to post on social media, and everybody wants you to think that they're doing the right thing. So we can focus on everybody else, but actually they don't matter, because in the exam hall it's not going to be them that you're needing. So all you need to do is focus on what you're doing and get that right, and let everybody else get on with their own thing, because chances are they're giving you the rosy version anyway.
Absolutely. Very good advice. Lucinda, I'm sleep obsessed, so I'm definitely the wrong person to be asking this question. All my children know I sort of count hours in a rather obsessive manner. What is setting up for success, bedtime routines and having a good end to the day? I'd love your thoughts on how best to sort of lead into the evening.
Absolutely. Well, sleep is so important for the brain. It's when the brain basically does all its housework overnight. So it cleans up those neurons and those neural pathways and gets everything fresh for the morning. And that you do a lot of learning overnight too. So a lot of what you've processed during the day is sort of put in stacked away at night. So what I find is the biggest challenge is getting children to sleep. More than actually once they are asleep. Occasionally they do wake up, but the primary thing is getting to sleep. And one of the hormones that you need to get to sleep is something called melatonin, which you naturally make. And what can really help to make melatonin is early morning or morning light. So one of the things I try and encourage people to do is to start their day being outside. Now, obviously the weather's getting a bit better now, but even if it's having breakfast outside or going for a little walk, or if you've got animals, maybe taking the dog out or feeding the chickens or getting the children to do something to get them outside first thing in the morning to get that morning light. And then it's the opposite in the evening. It's closing down the light. And the biggest light that disrupts melatonin is blue light, which comes from screens. So some kids, will wear these blue light blocking glasses that look a bit like normal spectacles, and those can be helpful. You can get screens to go over iPads and phones and so forth, but generally it's good to step away from screens an hour to an hour and a half before bedtime. So there might be a good chance to say, okay, so I want them to go to bed at say 9:30, something like that. So we're going to stop screens. It can be telly. Telly is quite usually a long way away from the eyes, so there's less of that being emitted, but it's things that are close up that you have to worry about. So you could switch from iPad or phone to TV at about 8, or you could just close off all screens and say, hey, we're going to play games, or we're going to have a nice bath. And things that can really help them to wind down. So Epsom salts are magnesium salts that you can put in the bath. You can put about 2 cups. So you can buy big bags online. And they're super relaxing. So they're very good for that very adrenal sort of fight or flight sort of stressy type of child. And it also helps with sort of things like restless legs and sort of twitches and anything sort of tight muscles. Maybe you've got a sporty child who gets quite a lot of injuries. And so that's a really lovely way of sort of getting kids to wind down, to get to sleep if they're quite wired up. Another thing is when babies are little, they will have their warm milk, and we all sort of give that up after a while, but actually going back to a warm milk, but making it a bit more grown up. So maybe putting some turmeric and some honey and some cinnamon or something like that in there to make it like a turmeric latte. And if they're dairy free, it could be almond milk or oat milk or whatever as well, because both of those are helpful with the sort of sleepy side of things. So a warm drink, an Epsom salt bath. And if they're really, really sort of struggling with sleep and winding down, then you can, again, get herbal supplements with things like cherry and lemon balm, and there's theanine and magnesium in. So we have an online shop called NatureDoc Shop, and we stock all of these things. So do message me if you do need any sort of specific guidelines with supplements.
Great. And actually, we've had a question in about, which you've covered a lot of, about if a child suffers from anxiety and lack of sleep. On the anxiety side, I think there is a crossover with lots that's been said, but is there anything else that either Alicia or Lucinda you'd like to add? If a child is particularly anxious, which I think tends to escalate throughout the day, certainly in my experience, I think things dealt with at night are always heightened.
You want me to go, Lucinda, or do you want to go?
You go first, Alicia.
I think one of the best things that I've used with clients who are really anxious at night is that it's called a worry bag. and it's called the worry delay technique, and it's a very well used technique in the world of psychology. And basically the idea is that when you're heading towards bed, our brains start to go quicker and we're thinking of all the things that we're worrying about. So get them to write them all down on pieces of paper, and then you say, right, we're going to put it into this safe drawer, or I'm going to put it into a bag and I'm going to take it downstairs. And the brain can then think, oh, okay, well, we're going to come back to this, so I can let go of worrying about it. But the really important thing is that you put in a time for the following day when you revisit it, and that you make sure you do revisit it at the right time. Otherwise, you're going to escalate their anxiety for the following night. So the worry delay technique can be really useful. And then you've got to work out, okay, is this a real problem worry or is this a hypothetical one? So if it's a real problem worry, I can do something about it, and then you do it, and then it no longer needs to be a worry. If it's the hypothetical, then it tends to be the worst case scenario. If I fail this exam, I'm not going to go to this school. And if I don't go to that school, I'm not going to get my GCSEs. If I don't get my GCSEs, and off you go. You're off and running. Okay, so we can't do anything about that, but we still feel anxious. So let's keep that piece of paper and we'll revisit it again 12 hours later. So it's a really nice technique, and it does work really well for them.
Fabulous. And sort of planning, I know, actually, I mean, it's a bit like having a piece of paper by your side of your bed. If you can't see it, you write down what you need to do, and you, as you say, you sort of compartmentalize it. Murray, can we get down to brass tacks on the sort of setting up for success in the literal terms? So how many hours of work are you, I mean, at this sort of age, what are we looking at in the Easter holidays, and is there a best structure? I mean, everyone works differently from night to day, but in your experience, what sort of timeline are we looking at?
Well, I'm going to give a very politician's answer and say, it really does depend on the child, and your child and they know themselves. And the problems always come if they are being pushed too hard to do more than they're comfortable with and they buck, or they're not getting enough nudging and support to do the right amount. So it's really about finding that happy medium for them. And that all, I think, just comes from really good quality conversations, week to week, about how they feel they're doing, where they're struggling, where they're not so sure. So rather than thinking about the time, I would think about the challenge ahead, first of all, and set that out as my stall. So you can be very forensic about this, but you can also be quite light touch. And I think at Common Entrance, it's appropriate really to just be fairly overview about it. But what I would suggest you do with your child is get their textbooks for each of the subjects, maybe one subject a day, don't overload it. Say, look through the contents page of the textbook. And so there you've got a list of all the topics and areas that they need to know for the exam. And just with some colored pens, say, right, how many are red and how many are amber and how many are green? So how do we feel about maths as a whole? And so forth with all the subjects. And then you can, rather than saying, right, you're going to do 6 hours of maths over the course of the next week, you can really start to say, okay, we know which areas we need to focus on, and we can kind of start to feel, by just discussing it, how we're doing in terms of improving those things and address those problem areas, and kind of get a feel for whether we're on pace to get to the time of the exams feeling good about ourselves. So it's not suddenly you're filling a quota. The converse is, the problem with the timetable as being like the be all and end all is that time very often gets used up doing pretty rubbish practice. So if the focus is around, right, where are we now? Where do we want to be? And week on week, right, where are we now? Where are we now? Are we feeling better? And that witnessing and conversation, you can have a very much more healthy approach to the whole challenge, which can be balanced and can be tailored to each child rather than being time obsessed. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I totally agree with everything you've said, but I'm going to sound contradictory on the timing as such. Is there an optimum concentration time for a child of this age? I mean, is there a sort of, again, a little bit like going back to what we said earlier about, I've done 3 hours maths. I mean, is that possible?
No, I don't believe so. And so it's a principle on which we built Tassomai as a revision program, but it's a principle that's used across education and across productivity as well. A couple of things to think about. First of all, the famous Pomodoro technique idea is that nobody can really make their best efforts for extended periods of time. And so you should have focused work for normally 25 minutes, and then 5 minutes off. And that 5 minutes off should stand up, leave the room, go walk around the garden and come back, something like that, to take your mind off it. But then also not to do long extended periods of the same task, because again, they're just massively diminishing returns. So if you think about the technique in retrieval practice is called interleaving. So that is to say, if you chop and change between subjects and between topics, then each time you revisit that topic, maybe a day or 2 days later, you've given yourself a chance to mentally filter that information. So the work becomes less predictable. You know you're not doing maths. So the interchanging is stimulating for your brain and for your memory. But then also the spacing of that repetition that comes about allows you to forget a little bit what you just learned and then revisit and relearn those things that you forgot. Whereas if you're just doing one thing all day, you're short-circuiting your short-term memory, and the benefit of that practice is very much diminished. So spacing and interleaving, it's kind of a watchword in retrieval practice thinking. Change your subject every 25 minutes, do 25 minutes of this, 25 minutes of that, and then revisit it each day or every couple of days to give yourself a chance to really hone in on where you need to improve more next time.
Mm-hmm. And just touching on memory again, because I think it's amazing. I mean, you know, people talk about having photographic memories, which I'm hugely envious of. Lucinda, nutritionally, from your angle, are there ways to help improve memory?
So yes, there's the hormone, the neurotransmitter in the brain that helps with memory. So working memory, short-term memory, processing, etc. It's called acetylcholine. And it also helps you self-regulate, so it helps with emotional regulation. So this all ties in with the anxiety side of things too. So all of these tips will help with that as well. So basically, to make acetylcholine, we need lots of omega-3, which is essential fatty acids made mainly from oily fish. So things like salmon, trout, anchovies, mackerel, etc. You can get it from prawns as well, and you can get it from walnuts, flax seeds, chia seeds, and also from hemp seeds. So if your child won't eat fish, you can also obviously get omega-3 in supplements, and there are plenty of those around on the market now. But also acetylcholine comes from choline-rich foods, which are things like liver, so chicken liver pate, which I know is not everyone's cup of tea, but I have to mention it because you can get some yummy recipes. Eggs, things like peanut butter, sunflower seeds. So these are sorts of things that kids, you might think about, but maybe not give all the time. So they're good extra things to try. Again, you can get choline-based supplements, you know, if you're really needing that. So something that says phospholipids or phosphocholine or phosphoserine will all be helpful for that in supplements. But what's really interesting is that if you don't eat lots of dairy, and if you've been on antibiotics for various reasons, then you might be low in some gut bugs. And these gut bugs are really, really important for making acetylcholine. So there's something called lactobacillus, and lactobacillus is the sort of key bacteria that's in yogurt and kefir and things like that. And lactobacillus is one of the main building blocks for making acetylcholine for this working memory and processing, etc. So those are very, very good to eat as well. But also equally, if your child has been on antibiotics for various reasons and you know that they've got poor working memory, maybe they've got dyslexia or dyspraxia or ADD or whatever it might be, then you may want to use, you know, give a probiotic as well that's got lactobacillus in it. Both lactobacillus and something called bifidobacterium also help to make something called GABA. And GABA is your inner yogi. It's your cool, it's your calm, it's your chilled out feeling. It's that feeling that you've had after drinking a cup of tea or having a yoga session or a meditation session or a really good night's sleep. You feel really calm. And again, things that can help boost up that GABA are things like yogurt, oats, chamomile, and some sort of whole grains. So sort of chamomile tea is very good, you know, oat-based porridge or granola or even a flapjack would be a good idea to boost that up. But also supplements wise, the supplement I mentioned earlier, which I just want to mention a bit more about, it's called theanine. And theanine is what is in tea, it's that feeling. You know, if you've had a really big shock, you've given a cup of tea and you feel so much calmer afterwards.
Yeah.
So it's basically that calm feeling after having a cup of tea without the caffeine. So it's a caffeine-free version of that. Amazing. And it comes in chewable gummies, little bears, if your child can't swallow capsules, or proper capsules. So either way.
Fabulous. Okay.
Something called saffron, and saffron's that lovely spice that's in paella that makes everything go lovely in orange. And saffron's a really happy spice. So do add it to your children's food, whether it's in cookies or risottos or paellas or whatever. And again, you can get supplements for this. So if they're quite down, quite low, quite stressed, quite anxious, again, saffron's a real balancer. And there has been quite a lot of research on saffron and attention deficit. So if your child finds it really difficult to focus, then this could be something to think about. So I just wanted to bring those things together.
That's really helpful. Can we pick up on some of our questions, guys? Sorry, it's probably going to sort of dart around a tiny bit on what we've discussed. But Murray, first off, I've got, how can I get my kid to stop rearranging their pencil case and revise? So the ultimate in procrastination.
Yeah, take it away from them. Only one pen, maybe. No, I think probably their motivations are fine. It sounds to me like there's a sort of archetype of reviser, which is the sort of one who wants to make everything nice and neat and straight and get all their books in order and colour their notes in. And you know, if you can share with them some ideas around the research around effective revision, it's been shown time and again that it has limited effect, in fact, even negative effect, in the sense that they're not using the time they could be used for better things. So if you Google, other search engines are available, apparently. If you Google Dunlovsky, who's a researcher in, I think, Michigan, who did a meta-study on the science of revision, it came out in about 2013. His meta-study showed which techniques are beneficial and which are harmful, and all that kind of fiddling and colouring in is long-term basically harmful. That said, there's a lot to be said for getting yourself a nice working environment at the beginning, keeping that working environment consistent, and doing some nice colour-coded planning at the beginning. So I wouldn't get on their case right away. If what they're doing is setting themselves up for a successful period of revision, great. But if they're then using that as a displacement technique, I think, an honest conversation about, well, what are you actually trying to achieve here? Because as soon as they engage with the thinking behind it, they'll very quickly realize, okay, actually, if anything, I'm adding to my stress, not ameliorating it.
And just touching on technique itself, I don't want to do schools down because they are working incredibly hard to do all sorts of things, but I do sometimes wonder, and actually, fun enough, my youngest child said to me, I know I'm supposed to be revising. What does that actually mean? So the sheer technique of revision and actually how you as a person learn best, whether that be visually, whether it be, learning a rhyme, singing a song about the, chemical compounds. How do they start to sort of drill down at this age when they're so young, really, as to how they're best going to remember all this information?
Well, the answer to the question in my mind is sort of hidden in the question. It all comes down to processes which you call metacognition. That is an intrinsic understanding of how you best learn and how what you're doing day to day is affecting your overall knowledge. So it's the key is to sort of stimulate some level of engagement in how it's going, rather than to be passively going through the motions and doing what they think revision is. So the counter example, the bad thing is spending all day reading your notes or reading your textbook or copying them out and thinking that is in some way good when it's actually a very limited potential. The good way to really get to grips with your learning and to start to steer yourself in a productive direction is to constantly make your revision about low stakes, short quizzing of yourself with quick feedback. So whether you're using examples in the textbook or bits of practice papers or apps like Tassomai or anything else, flashcards, if you can get them to start writing down what they don't know on a flashcard, or quizzing themselves on what they don't know, and measuring their score and correcting themselves as they go, that engagement in a quizzing technique will very quickly get them to steer themselves into the technique which for them breeds best success. There's not a one size fits all, but that engagement in that quizzing and feedback is what's going to help them find what works for them. Brilliant,
thank you. And just now moving on to we touched earlier about signs of when to step in as a parent. Alicia, I'd love to hear your thoughts when either a child thinks they've done too much or not enough. I mean, the sort of encouragement and pushing on the one hand, but also hand holding on another. It's quite a fragile balance.
Yeah, and you have to be super careful. I think, girls perhaps are more likely to be perfectionist in doing too much. And of course, there's the stereotype that boys actually probably won't do enough. And I think we have to hold the stereotypes lightly, because it's not actually very helpful. And if you say that to boys, they end up, you reinforce the stereotype anyway. I think that idea that Murray's saying about, particularly for boys, if you think that boys are often very competitive, competition led, so actually that idea of quizzes and answers can really help them. And I think if you're, as a parent, if you're having to push too hard, then we've got to kind of look at what's going on again underneath, because particularly at this age, 13, the brains are changing big time. And this idea of something called prospective memory isn't great. So prospective memory is like you have all the right intentions, and yeah, absolutely, I'm going to go upstairs and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to revise for an hour. And then you get there and suddenly your friends are there and they're online and they're asking you questions. And no matter how many times you say that, prospective memory is just not very well hardwired at this particular age group. So they're likely to be distracted. So I think one of the things you can do is, we have conversations about, why it matters to put in this little and often, how we can set it up to feel manageable. If they're very resistant, what is that about? What's the feeling that's stopping them getting going? Being really super practical. So when let's just have one room, which is not your bedroom, which is the place where we're going to do a bit of work. So when we come out of that room, we can forget about it. And I think that, by the time you get to GCSEs, frankly, you shouldn't really be that involved in terms of the actual work. But at this stage, you might have to be alongside, I don't know what Murray thinks, but I think you might have to be alongside a bit, doing perhaps a little bit of that quizzing or just making a few suggestions. But I honestly think if you're pushing really hard, actually all we do is disincentivize them. We put them off learning, which is a massive mistake, because actually in terms of our mental health, we want to be learning throughout life. So we don't want to kill the joy of learning at 13. That is absolutely not a good plan. So I don't know if you got anything to add, Murray, to that, but those are my thoughts.
No, I agree, but it's difficult to strike that balance between being, over the top and pushing too hard and abandoning them to their own devices. So I think that kind of, occasional help buddy system, if you've made the flashcards right now I'll quiz you on them kind of thing, is really great and collaborative and helps make it fun. So often, education is something that seemingly is done to children rather than with them. And so, yeah, if you can get involved in some small way and help them feel like it can be fun and motivating, then that's really going to be successful.
One of the things that I always found really helpful was getting them to teach it to you. So I'd say, because it's kind of a bit of fun then, isn't it? And you sit there going, go on, I know absolutely nothing about this. Why don't you? Because if you can teach something, you know it.
Absolutely. My parents were both doctors, and they used to have this expression that they was part of their training, which was see one, do one, teach one. So you see an appendectomy, then you do one, then you're teaching the next doctor, which is slightly terrifying. But the same approach I've used so often with my students, right? I'm going to show you how to solve an equation like this. Now I'm going to write you another one to try yourself. And now can you explain this to me as if I hadn't taught it? So it works really, really well. Yeah.
And just going back, I love the idea of good association, whether it be the room that you're working in, separate to, not necessarily your bedroom if you can, so that's, you're slightly separating the two. And also, Lucinda, I guess sort of meal times, I think it might be a child who's super sort of diligent. It might be, tempting for them to be sort of snacking rather than actually sitting down with family, eating a meal together. Do you have any views on that? I mean, it's all about good associations, I would imagine.
I think eating together is really, really important. And I know that doesn't always happen. We're all busy people. But even if it's sitting down with them, having a cup of tea whilst they're eating breakfast and just spending time with them, it's all about spending time. And also with the meals, as long as, so if you're sitting down having a family meal, then that it doesn't really matter what you're serving. It's more showing them this is what you do, because so many families sit in front of the telly eating microwave food. And of course, that is not really going to bring a good relationship with food. And I think also you can then see how much they're eating. And, if they're sort of chowing down 3 really good meals, then they might not have that many snacks. But if they're actually being a bit sort of picky with their food, then it might be that they will need those snacks just to sort of get them along. Or you can say, right, okay, it's because you had a whole packet of biscuits at 6 o'clock and that's why you're not sitting up supper at 7 or whatever it might be. So it's quite a good way of gauging where they're at as well.
Absolutely. I feel like so it's been so fantastic hearing you. I've had my eye off the questions. One of the questions that have come into us, actually, Maury, I'm going to direct this to you, is how do you help identify gaps in a child's knowledge? Which sounds like a huge question to me, but so I'm going to be very happy to defer to you on that.
Well, it's the kind of key question in all of this sort of revision work. I mean, it's so important to know what you don't know, so that you can then address it. So it is vital, and it's difficult. Basically, it's the fundamental of the software I've developed, which is through that kind of exploratory quizzing in game to find out where the gaps are. And then we sort of build a sort of tree of knowledge that shows here are the red leaves and the green leaves. But you can do, as I suggested earlier, look through the contents pages of the textbook and just through a conversation, not necessarily you'll be there forever. Do you know the answer to this? Do you know the answer to this? But just ask them, how confident do you feel about the topic of X, Y, and Z? And you can do a pretty quick run through of the whole subject through the contents page like that with a couple of highlighter pens. And then you can get them to kind of write, okay, now let's dig into this a little bit further. So, you can identify it that way. The other thing I would think you can do quite effectively is through this sort of quizzing approach. If you've got past papers, you can buy lots of common entrance past papers, I think, through kind of Glore Park and so on, or exercises in the book, doing some questions, doing some quizzes, and then quickly, like immediately checking the answers and getting the feedback on it will very quickly help develop for your child within themselves this kind of more kind of concrete knowledge of where their gaps are. So again, it's that metacognitive approach. Getting them to identify their gaps is really key. What you're trying to do is get the things you don't know to be things that you do know, and then you can work on making them things you maybe didn't know you do know now, and then you do know them, and then you can go in full of confidence, even if you didn't quite follow that sentence.
We're all over it. And I guess just drawing together some of the strands we've talked about, whether it's anxiety, eating sensibly, sleeping well, knowing the gaps in knowledge, understanding the technique behind revision, all of these are reliant on a child that is communicating with you. I'm really interested to hear from all 3 different angles. If you're dealing with a child who isn't super communicative, or not even understanding their own emotions necessarily, or lack of knowledge, or sleeping patterns, how do we best support them, and how do we approach a child that's not going to communicate so easily? Alicia, I'm eyeballing you first.
It's all on Zoom who's being eyeballed, isn't it? I think there's that kind of stereotype that boys don't talk. So I think ideally, you know your child best. If you are concerned that actually you think underneath all of this is a kind of running anxiety, then we can be quite explicit. So we might say to them, do you know what, I've noticed that over the last few days, you've said every time I've asked you if you're okay, you said you're all right, and yet what I've noticed is you're doing X. So you start to link, they start to see the behavior that you're seeing that would indicate that perhaps they're not okay. What we don't want to do is kind of do the blaming and shaming. So then we might say something like, I'm wondering if perhaps you're really worried about such and such. And by wondering, I think wonder is a great way of doing it, because it's gentle. It's not, this is what you should be doing, and you can often get to the bottom of it. So I remember one of mine, just before common entrance, actually. And I said, she was all over the place. She was being horrible, actually. And I really should have known better, but I left it a couple of days. And eventually I said to her, sweetie, you said you're okay, but you seem really, really angry. What's going on? And she burst into tears and she went, Mama, I'm really worried I'm not going to be able to find where I sit in the exam. And I'm thinking, oh my God, is that it? But by knocking out that problem, I was like, right, okay, what can we do about that problem? So, we can go to the exam, we can find out how it works. Right, that's taken out one little chunk. And normally they do that when the whole problem is just too big to even think about. So you focus on one small detail that you can make into a worry, because that feels more manageable. So if it's that sort of stuff that's going on, you want to be taking those out one at a time, because that will overall that reduces their anxiety and worry.
Brilliant. Lucinda, your thoughts?
I think that if you don't have a particularly communicative child, then it's just important to put in a bit of routine. And that's really good. Structured meal times, working out, when screen time is going to happen or not, because I find that, well, with my kids, they're less communicative when they're just wanting to be on the screens all the time. So if you've got a certain limit to that, then you're going to have more time chatting with them, working out what's going on. And then, as I said, prioritizing the sleep as much as possible. And also hydration, that's a really key thing too, because often kids are a bit more zoned out if they're dehydrated.
Yes, we haven't touched on that, and that's huge, isn't it? Hydration for all sorts of, brain power and headaches or focus and all sorts of things, isn't it?
Absolutely. So, most kids of age 12 need about 6 cups of water a day. So it's really kind of one with each meal and one in between. So, maybe one when they wake up in the morning, one mid-morning, one mid-afternoon, and then one at each meal. And that's going to be enough. Obviously 8 is even better, but if they can start with that, that's great. And if they do get quite dehydrated, think about things like coconut water, or adding a tiny splash of juice or something to the water, just to make it a bit tasty if they don't particularly like water. Great.
And Murray, anything to add?
I also don't much like water. I've had some. I think, I agree absolutely with what's been said. That if you can create opportunities for free-flowing conversation, like, good routine and meal times together and so on, that's a really good way to try and break some of those log jams. And then I think, some of these behaviors obviously are stemming from underlying anxieties like Alicia described. I think, and maybe this is because I'm a data science person, if you can find any way of sort of what we would say is like measuring baselines, if you can observe a certain behavior and discuss it with them and go, well, I've noticed, I'm trying to think of a good example, but you've not been finishing your food, or you've been getting up very late, or putting off your revision this long, rather than making that the thing that's the problem and you have to solve the problem. If you can sort of start to measure that behavior and say, okay, well, a week later, you've actually improved it by this little bit and you're on the right track. Anything that's focused on the incremental changes rather than you're not doing what I've asked you to do, you're here and I want you to be here. If you're focused on the changes, that can really open things up and get people on the right track. It's often not so much the anxiety itself, but the fear that they're not going to be able to do anything about it, that sort of causes so many problems. So if you can focus on the improvements that are being made, I think that can unlock a lot.
So with all your amazing advice, we've set ourselves up for success, the preparation is done, we've had a fantastic run at this, and we're now the night before exams. where your child is riddled with nerves, and behaviorally, again, speaking as a mother, not as an expert, quite often things start to kick off when they're nervous or worried. Your child is now, behaving pretty badly, might even have gone into tantrum mode. How best to handle the night before and these wretched nerves, which I guess if they are channeled correctly can be really helpful, but they can also be very destructive. Alicia, can I ask you first off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that, the quickest way out of any feeling is straight through the middle of it. So we want to kind of allow them to feel what they're feeling so they can move on. So you might say something like, you're coming across as incredibly angry, but actually I'm worried if you're really nervous. So you're trying to, and that's emotional intelligence, being able to label what you're actually feeling. What do you need right now? I don't know what I need. And you're sitting there thinking, and I said, well, sometimes when I feel like that, I want to go and punch a pillow, or I want to go for a run, or I want to, actually, I hate running, so I wouldn't do that. But I want to have a hug, or I want to scream into a pillow. What do you think might be helpful for you? Once everything's calm, there's no point in having a rational discussion when somebody is off and running in fight, flight, or freeze. It's just a pointless exercise. Once they're calm, then I think we go into, you've done the work. Tomorrow is really just about you showing what you know. Sometimes it goes according to plan. Sometimes it doesn't. Whatever happens tomorrow, I love you unconditionally. There is nothing that you can do tomorrow that will make me love you more or less. If you get into this for school, great. If you don't, there's another one. So it's quite good to be a little bit stressed, but you want to be around about a 5 rather than a 10. So let's just keep this in perspective. Life will go on. And when one door, is that idea, isn't it? When I always say to them, exams are just about door opening, and the better you do, the more doors get open, but there's always another door. So let's not worry about it. You is enough by me, and you're bigger than any collection of certificates you're ever going to get from anywhere. So let's keep it in perspective.
Amazing, thank you. And Lucinda?
Yeah, so I would just go, send them up for an Epsom salt bath, maybe have a nice lavender spray, some essential oils, maybe a nice cup of turmeric latte, as I said, something really calming. And I just want to say, just being a mum of 3 that have been through this, is the most hilarious bit is that when they get their exam results the following week, they all jump for joy and give each other a hug, and then they completely and utterly forget about it from there on. So they don't know who's got what results. They know nothing. They don't compare. It's just of the moment, and then they move on. So even the next day, they'll have forgotten all about Common Entrance. So it really is a very short, sharp part of their lives. So I just wanted to share that with you, just in case you're a bit worried about it.
Thank you. And Murray, finally, does popping the entire file under the pillow and just banking on osmosis work?
It's always worth a try, but it's probably a little bit uncomfortable. So I wouldn't. I think, the secret has got to be whatever you can do to get a good night's sleep and meet the day ahead well rested. So I think, the salt bath and lavender sounds like a good idea to me. This isn't exactly night before advice, but I think it's an important thing to get across when you're talking to your children about Common Entrance as well. They're really unusual exams compared to GCSEs and A-levels, which are all sent off to be marked externally and so on. These will tend to go to the school that you're applying to and be marked by the teachers who are thinking about teaching you next time. So it's not just about whether you get 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10, but it's about whether you can communicate to your future teacher what kind of person you are. So rather than just solely being focused on what you know and what you don't know, I think an approach that says this is about getting across your personality and how nice you might be to teach is, I think, is a nice approach to take. And if that's part of their preparation and they're less fixated on just the binary, I know this or I don't know this. Of course, that's important, but it's not the be all and end all. They approach that exam they're just trying to introduce themselves to their future teachers. It takes, I think, a lot of the anxiety away, and they can go out there and, give their best on the day.
Fantastic. Well, guys, can I say a huge thank you from School Notices to Alicia Drummond from Teen Tips and the Wellbeing Hub, to Murray Morrison from Tassomai, and Lucinda Miller from NatureDoc. We are very lucky to have you on our panel tonight, and a wealth of information.